Some of the most common questions international students ask about attending university in China are: what kind of language barriers will I face? What's the best way to deal with culture shock? What are the academic differences? And how do I navigate daily life? First, I want to talk about culture shock because China is so profoundly different. Though for me, it's actually been in a good way. But for you to understand what I'm talking about and my perspective, you need to understand where I'm coming from. I moved from an individualistic, heterogeneous culture, Canada, that is filled with immigrants. And actually, I moved from the world's most multicultural city, number one in the world, Toronto, Canada. So I was used to feeling fairly anonymous, unseen, definitely not pointed out. There's lots of older white guys in Canada, but also a huge diversity. Like virtually every city, people from every country in the world live in Toronto. And so that's what I grew up with. That was the norm. That's who I went to school with, and my son, too, and it affects you. You get a certain perspective of the world. There's actually a business professor at University of Toronto, my university, who writes about how a city basically has one of the biggest effects on us in growing up, where we live. And so Toronto definitely has affected me. And that's probably why I'm really fascinated about different cultures. So, anyway, I came from that kind of milieu and I moved to China, which I think is most people would think of as maybe one of the most homogeneous countries in the world. But not only did I move to China, I moved to Nanjing, China. And Nanjing, China is one of China's four ancient great capitals because it was a capital of China during multiple dynasties. And so it's very traditional. So I moved to very traditional China. The opposite of that in China would be Shanghai. Shanghai would be the most westernized city in China. So this is something I think people in Shanghai, because Shanghai is the big business city, where the East meets the West in China more than in any other city. I don't think they get a perspective like I do from my experience living in China. So I've been in China for 9 years, and I started off in Nanjing, ancient great capital, but then I moved to actually a more traditional province after that. Actually, the number one most traditional province in China, Shandong province. That's where I am now in Yantai, and I used to live, which is a seaside city, actually China's biggest seafood port. But I also lived in the capital of this province, Jinan, for 5 years. And so 7 of my 9 years in China has been in the most traditional province. And so I feel that I really got a sense of traditional China, which is the China the world does not know. I've come to that conclusion after 9 years. Like, if you live in Shanghai all your life, like a lot of the business people, vast majority, I'd say 90 plus percent, are probably in Shanghai of business people. And I would say you don't learn about China in Shanghai. You're going to learn about the most westernized China. You're going to meet the most westernized Chinese people. You're going to meet people from other cultures, different countries from around the world. It's more like Toronto. It's more diverse and multicultural. But, in contrast, I've lived in the most traditional parts of China, and that's what I wanted. I've been fascinated from the very beginning about Chinese culture because it's so different from Western culture. And that's why I got this idea that I can help international students adjust to living in China. I think I'm really well placed to do that because I've been reflecting on it. Not only have I been reflecting on it, but I've actually been living in the most traditional parts of China. It's harder to think of a better series of experiences than what I've had to understand traditional China. So I'm basically, my real focus is on helping you understand the rest of China that the world knows nothing about. Like, from my perspective, knows very little about the thousands of universities that are not, that are outside of Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. Um, Still very good universities, but maybe not the absolute top tier. But certainly the cities are much less polluted in general, I would say, and there's probably a nicer lifestyle. And you're also more surrounded by Chinese speakers. Although I've managed to survive through all that on my survival Chinese, which is limited, which I'm a little bit ashamed of, but my whole focus has been learning about Chinese culture. And so that's what I've spent all the time, my time on. So anyway, to summarize, I moved from a highly individualistic, heterogeneous culture in the West, Canada, and its most multicultural city, the world's most multicultural city, to one of the most traditional cities in a traditional country, China. And so a huge difference. I noticed it immediately. And I've never heard anyone talk about this. And maybe they haven't gone through the extreme adjustment that I've gone through. Although for me, it really hasn't been that hard at all. I've been fascinated by it. Instead of scared and intimidated, I'm absolutely fascinated by it. Just been, yeah, it's just been like in heaven trying to understand this completely different culture. And I've read lots of books and so on, and I'm not wrong. It is profoundly different than the West. So this is where I can help you. So when you get on a train or a bus, you stand out in China, traditional China. Not as much, obviously, in Shanghai, but traditional China, you will. People will look at you. So that's the first thing you need to learn to deal with. It hasn't bothered me at all because maybe because I'm a Leo and I'm sort of open. I'm not afraid of meeting people and have nothing to hide and so on. And so I'm open to the culture. I've been just like a sponge. And I think that's how helped me make a lot of friends in China. I've never had a problem. I mean, just yesterday, I'm working out at the gym, and a man comes up and says he's going to invite me, wants to invite me for tea, with someone, a friend of his, and this happens all the time. I'm not trying to network or anything. I'm just being myself, and I'm open to the culture. I'm fascinated by it. I ask questions. So those would be some tips dealing with culture shock. It's a collective society. You stand out. So the good side of this is that, when I'm, say, on a subway or something and I'm feeling a little bit lost, it's likely reflected on my face. And before I even ask someone for directions, and usually everyone knows a little bit of English, you have to understand as much as you need to know Chinese, and I definitely encourage you to dedicate yourselves to learning Chinese. That would make life much easier, but you have to understand the perspective of English. Like if you're a little intimidated by the idea of going out into wherever place you might live and interacting with people and with very limited Chinese, people generally don't expect you to know Chinese. Like that's the perspective. They assume you're probably an English speaker if you're a foreigner, and they'll try and address you in English, and they want to learn English. Like you need to understand. Definitely the young people. The older people, no, not so much. It's too challenging for them. But any young person in their 20s, maybe even these, definitely 20s, they're going to want to learn English, the vast majority, and they're going to want to practice it. So I get approached all the time. People want to try their English out, and or they'll just say hello, like to give you an idea, like an e-bike will just go by on the street, like someone I don't know at all, and you'll just hear hello, and then they just keep on going, right? So this happens all the time when they see someone who's different and who's not Chinese, obviously not Chinese. So they don't expect you to know Chinese and they don't get angry if you do. Like they still don't. I feel so bad about it. I was just talking again with another couple yesterday and we struggled through a conversation. They knew some English, their English was better than my Chinese. So we interact, and knew a little bit of Chinese. So I would use my little bit of Chinese to confirm that I understood what they were talking about. But, we're largely talking in English. I know some married couple, and we had a nice conversation. We were there for a while. And I learned a lot, and where he worked and where she worked and so on. And so this happens all the time and there's no anger. They're just asking questions. There's huge amount of curiosity. Like this is, I come from the world's most multicultural city. Even if I go to other parts of Canada, people aren't as open to other cultures in general like they are in Toronto. Toronto is unique. And so that's what I grew up with. And the rest of Canada isn't necessarily like that. And so there's places in Canada where, if you're an outsider, people don't really, they're not so open to you. They're a little bit closed. And so even in my own country and they see a white person, I'm not from their town. So there isn't this openness. And I think this is a reflection of Western culture in China, and I've reflected on this a lot, is that there's this openness to the world. As much as it's kind of portrayed as very insular, and it has a long history of insularity, no question. And there is an inward looking part of it, but there's also this kind of curiosity of different cultures that I have not seen noted in any other of the 40 plus countries I've visited. I've thought really deeply about this. This is nowhere else on YouTube. I guarantee it. I don't hear conversations like this, but I've reflected on this and I come from a very multicultural city and I almost feel like there's a mindset, almost like a multicultural mindset in China. At least that people are open to different cultures, like curious about them. So they'll ask questions. And if there's kind of, I'm trying to, incorporate someone of a different skin color, brown or black, and maybe there's a little bit of racism there. Of course, I haven't really experienced it. I get treated like gold, basically. And I would say that races, it's different. From what I've heard, the people that I've met, brown and black people that I've met in China, I would say it comes from ignorance, just not having the experience interacting with people from those cultures. And so to give you an idea, like Toronto, the word race, you just don't even use the word race. If you use that word, you're racist. That's, I would say, the kind of unwritten code in Toronto. You just stay away from that word because there's so much baggage around it. So we don't, if we see a couple that, where she's white and he's black or something like that, we don't talk about race. We just say it's fairly normal. Toronto actually has the highest rate in the world of mixed marriages like that. And so it's become a norm in a way. It still stands out, but it's been normalized to a certain extent. I would say in China, they would use that word race. And so when I hear that word, I automatically react. Like I have a physical reaction to that because I never hear that word back home. And so there's something deeper. Like I feel like China really is open to the world. And if you learn more about its history, you start to understand why, because it's far more multicultural than you realize. What it is the way I'm starting to think of it is like it's Toronto only 2,000 years into the future. So it's people living together from different cultures. It used to be a bunch of different countries like Europe, only they've all kind of assimilated into one kind of Chinese civilization where they've all largely adopted the same kind of values and way of looking at the world, which is essentially Confucian values. And that's the way they look at the world. And so when you go to different parts of China, it's very different. So this is why I think it's good for you to understand that I've lived in different parts. There's different food traditions here in Shandong than in Nanjing. If you only live in one part of China, you won't get that sense of how different it is in other places. So there's lots of different dialects and so on. There's places where people don't really know Mandarin, they just know their local dialect. So you can't talk to them unless you know the dialect. So even Chinese can't. And so there's way more diversity under the surface than you realize. And so, wow, I've got on this whole thing about the diversity. So, anyway, in the city, I stand out. People see when I have a problem and they come and ask me, do I need help with something? I look a little lost. So they're all very aware that Chinese is very difficult language and that I'm a foreigner, right? That's a major us and them kind of thing. But from my point of view, I can't speak for all cultures, but being a foreigner I'm treated better than other Chinese. Chinese people treat me better than they treat other Chinese. And I have so many stories proving this. No one is going to change my mind about this. It's just happened too many times. So I don't think I've ever been to a country that is so welcoming to foreigners. China seems to be like as part of its culture. Toronto, I would say, is more open, but there's lots of other most of Canada is not so open as I would say Toronto is to other cultures. And so, anyway, that's where I come from. So, being different, I stand out. People see I need help. They come and ask me. And if there's a problem with language, they'll ask around. Does anyone else know a better language or English better? Like it's like that. It's almost like a community, even in the biggest cities. I've been in a city of 10 million, and it feels like a little village where everyone knows everyone. And so they'll all ask, "Oh, does anyone know English?" So they can talk to this foreigner better. And so next thing you know, there's someone standing beside you whose English is better than the first person you talk to. And so I'm just giving you this bigger picture because this will shape how you look at China. And this is deep experience. I reflect on this every day. It's absolutely fascinates me because I kind of think Canada in the future, 2000 years, it'll be more like China, where we have a common unifying kind of culture that unifies people from all different countries that are basically there because they're immigrants originally, whereas in China, it was a bunch of different countries like Europe, but they unified. That's the difference with China is the harmony. That is the number one value in China. And it's real. It's not just words. I've experienced it all over the place. And so in traditional China, you're going to get more help. And so that is basically my conclusion about that. And I would say if you're going to a place like Shanghai or even Beijing and Guangzhou, these are tier one cities, and they would be much more international. And so you might not stand out so much, although I also did get help in Shanghai. Um, but there's many more foreigners, although that's shifted since COVID. So Shanghai isn't quite as diverse and filled with foreigners now as it used to be. But relatively speaking, I would still say it's far more than tier two and tier three, tier four cities. So the next topic is language barriers. I've already kind of touched on that a little bit. What I would say about language, so again, to repeat shamefully, is that I can't say that I'm bilingual, English and Chinese. I have survival Chinese. I'm always kind of working on it, but, I've been working full time. And I've even tried enrolling in courses for Chinese. I can get free Chinese lessons here at the university I'm working at. But I tried it and, it was like 4 hours in the morning. I met all sorts of I was there with all sorts of international students. It was a wonderful learning environment. Oh my gosh, it was maybe the best I've ever experienced. Everyone was so friendly, and they're from all over the world, Africa, you name it. And we're all trying to communicate with each other in this new language. And so it was really a wonderful class. I really enjoyed it, but it just took too much of my day to be on top of my courses. And, I really enjoy teaching my courses, which are in English, and they're, generally have to do with cross cultural things. So I really devote myself to them, and it's just not enough time left to learn Chinese, although I have a few apps and so on. So, anyway, so from my perspective, is that I would say because I'm stuck with work, and I have talked to some other teachers who from the West who teach English to Chinese, and they've been here for decades and lived all over the place and everything. And they, I'm always envious of them because they know Chinese, two or three of them. And so I was asking, like, how did you do it? And they go, you're right, it is. It's too difficult to work and learn Chinese. And so what they did is take a couple years off and go to school. So what I get from that is he's a confirmation of the challenge of me learning Chinese, given I'm working, but also identifying how um, the good position that you're in as a student where you can devote that time to learn this language. I mean, take advantage of that time in your life. Like, it's a tough language, but it will open doors for you for sure. Just learning it. Chinese, of course, love that. Anything to do with learning about their culture. So, this is what I ask, all about their culture, and they dying to share their culture with the world. They really are, like, right, everyone, the students, that's probably the number one thing, because they know they're not understood. And I can see that they're not understood, not only misunderstood by the West, I would say the entire understand China. The closest, of course, would be the other Confucian countries near China, Japan and Vietnam and Korea. And so most of the world does not understand China. And so to come here and be a student, have the time to learn the language and learn more about the culture, I am jealous of you international students because you have that time. Take advantage of it when you're here, because later on, when you're at work, it'll be too challenging. So you really do have to devote yourself to learning that Chinese. But what I would say is, like, to put it all in perspective, you need that for your Chinese classes if that's what you're taking, to understand the classes, obviously. But if you're taking your classes in English, you don't need to know Chinese. And if you go out into the community, the marketplace, you can get by on survival Chinese, ordering food and whatnot. But I also get some Chinese friends to help me, and so I almost see it as kind of maybe a bit of a strategy to make friends. So, I'm planning to buy a computer later today. I've got two students that are coming with me and helping me. And so, I'm learning from them, or I'm, connecting with them. And this happens all the time because people, they love to help you. They want to help you and so on, make China easier to live in. And so, I think that maybe that's part of the barrier too, is that as an English speaker and not really fully understanding Chinese, it causes me to ask people for help. a lot more than I would. If I knew Chinese, I could just go out on my own and never, really have to ask for help so much. I could interact with Chinese, but it's a funny kind of explanation, but I definitely think I connect. When I think of other foreign teachers, even ones who know Chinese, I'm out there in the community. I'm interacting. I'm making friends. I've got I don't know what it is, 300 people on WeChat now. And that's the other thing. You can use WeChat, exchange WeChat IDs, connect to the person. It has a translation function. And so these are ways that you can communicate. I love cycling. I love traditional China. I cycle when I was in Jinan for 5 years. Almost every weekend, I was cycling to a rural village. And I mean rural. So agricultural village, completely different than Jinan. They were within cycling distance. I would go in the middle of these communities. And of course, the chances of coming across someone who knew English were even more rare. And that's when, and I would get invited in for tea or peanuts or something like that. And then we'd have to use our phones. We could communicate and we would exchange IDs. So it was possible. And I mean, I had tea and everything. And I'm just the most curious guy imaginable, really adventurous. And so I'm always asking questions. One place I was really interested in the solar panels on the roof, in this impoverished Chinese village. It's got more like solar panels than you'd see in a modern Canadian city, on the different houses. So this was really amazing to me. And so I asked for a tour of the guy's roof, and he took me up on his roof. We went on the ladder and walked on his roof. I saw the things drying there, and I'm telling you, I've had a deep experience of China. And so I'm able to communicate with these people. And so you can get by. So outside that Chinese only speaking class, I'm not encouraging you not to learn Chinese, but just to say you can get by with English, with WeChat, all this. Negotiating, the other thing, another little tip, negotiating the subways and buses. I've flown on my own to other parts of China, just totally on my own, like doing a little research and, discuss. I wanted to go to one of the poorest provinces in China, partly because it also has a ton of forests. My PhD is in forestry. And so I wanted to look at community forestry and ethnic groups and so on. I went there all on my own and I had to figure my way out using, translation function. I met people, we used translation or their best English, my best Chinese, and also I find with particularly iPhone, Apple Maps. You can use Apple Maps in any Chinese city. Everything is in English and it shows the buses actively, all the bus routes and which buses you need to take to get wherever you want to go. So I find that really valuable, that Apple Maps. So, I had a non-Apple phone originally, so I didn't have that. All I had was Baidu, the Chinese map, and so cycling was challenging. I would get a little bit lost, but Apple Maps, no problem. Another tip on how you can survive. So I'm basically saying that do your best to learn the Chinese language, but you don't, and if you can practice it before you come, great. But once you're here, this is the best place to do it. Because people all around you are speaking Chinese, but you don't need to know 100% of it right off the bat. You can get by a lot. 9 years in China, I survive on survival Chinese, and otherwise just ask for help. And when I do, I meet people, make a new friend, and so it's not so bad. So, anyway, that puts that all in perspective. The next topic, academic differences. There's no question. It is completely different in terms of how classes operate. Now, I have to add that I've not ever sat in on a class by a Chinese professor, but I hear all about it, because I'm teaching Chinese students all the time. Never sort of international. I've never taught. I have one international student now, so first time who's from Russia, and but everyone else is Chinese, and that's who I've been interacting with. And so I've asked them because a lot of what I'm teaching involves culture, and I'll ask them, well, how is my class different than your classes with Chinese professors? And even this Russian student that I had told me right up front, the first class, he said, "Man, are Chinese students ever different with you compared to their Chinese teachers?" And I went, "What? Like how?" And he said, "Oh, they're just much more relaxed." And so, so Chinese teachers are much more hierarchical and I think quite strict. And so some Chinese students are kind of intimidated by their teachers. They don't want to look stupid, is maybe a big part of the reason, and just very assertive. There's a real dedication to excellence in China. I have to say this. You're in like this huge country, vast population that's unimaginable, especially someone from Canada. This one province I'm in right now is 2.5 times the population of Canada alone. And Canada is a bigger country than China. And so the feeling like in China, I just think I'm learning a lot and getting a lot of sort of confidence from the culture because it's powerful. It's a powerhouse. It doesn't surprise me China's becoming a winner. There's no question, hands down. The West doesn't have a chance. The power of the culture here, and everyone believes in it, thousands of years. I think the whole world can benefit from this. So, this is also partly why I'm doing this series, because I really see, and I've gone deep in Chinese culture. There's so much that's good that can be transmitted to the world, especially from the less developed parts of the world where you likely come from. I think the partnerships you can develop with China are would be incredible. You're already seeing it in Africa. I would say it's not a trick. Generally China is well received in Africa. I've been sort of following this, but I guess you hear some people saying, "Oh, it's colonial relationship or whatnot." But I would say no. I think you're using the Western framework. I'm from the West. I understand colonialism, and Canada is colonized. I'm well aware. I've interacted with our native people a lot. I'm well aware what colonization does. And China was partly colonized, but never fully. And so it gets colonized countries. There's an identification there that occurs. And, Africa has been fully colonized and all the negative impacts of that. I think China can really help that. And learning about Chinese culture, the way they think about different groups, countries, there's a respect there for cultural differences that I've detected after years of living here. And so I think there's a huge benefit in the discipline and the power of the culture, the belief in their culture that China will rise again and has already been, risen a few times already. And so there's no doubt there's a pride here and a power in it, and you can learn from that. And Confucius is part of that, always trying to be a better person and getting better. So you will be challenged, but I think, people who are afraid that's going to be too hard, there's this huge cultural trait of trying to improve yourself. Like it's all people aren't basically Chinese think people are good. So this is where it's different from the West. They basically believe people are good. That's what Confucius thought. We just need to be more disciplined and refine our behavior and reflect more and get better and better. So there's a whole focus, you hear it everywhere, on getting better and better. So if you want to challenge yourself to become the best person you possibly can, I can't think of a better place than China to do that. You're going to hear that all the time. And so this is partly why I, as a person from the West, have no problems talking about and trying to reduce some of the barriers to international students in coming to China. You know, Chinese universities are rising. The US and Western universities are in decline. And so to come here and with the low tuition, the opportunities, I think it's an incredible opportunity and learn the language and learn to partner with Chinese around the world. And you can help China understand the world. Like that's what I think China needs more than anything is to understand the complexity and diversity in the outside world. And that's what I do in my English classes all the time. For instance, I'm not just teaching English, I'm teaching Model United Nations. I'm also now teaching cross cultural communications and how it's different between Chinese and different parts of the world. So these are things that from my years of experience, I'm sure they need to learn. So the academic differences are like the Western point of view, it's more on creativity and critical thinking. Whereas in China, it's more about memorization and rote learning. So, learning the material really well through examinations. So, examinations are a big part of the culture. It's really everything in Chinese culture. But you know, China's had a meritocracy for like thousands of years. And actually, meritocracy came to the West from China. You know, China's been having tests forever to identify the best people to work in government. And so that is why it's also no surprise to me just how good the Chinese government is at managing China's rise. Like it's unprecedented. There's so many unprecedented things about China's rise. It has everything to do with their meritocracy. I can go on and on about that, but as you can see, I can fill podcast after podcast of the depth of this. Anyway, so it's rote learning. People study hard for the tests to pass the tests, and everything is like an exam. Like that's the culture. But it's proven. And I think I would actually say in the West, we probably don't do enough of that. We criticize it. We see it as kind of not as good as being creative. But I would say it's foundational. What China is about is foundational knowledge, in depth understanding of a subject area. And I think there's no place better than China to develop that because I think that in combination with the creative kind of way of educating people in the West is a deadly combination. You're unstoppable with both of those. So it's not one or the other, it's one and the other. So, for sure, in China, the creativity and the critical thinking aren't up to the same standard as in the West. Like they're not encouraged as much because of the more homogeneous traditional culture of examinations. So, but the West could use more of that. We could use more time devoted to really understanding a subject area rather than kind of mixing fact in with opinion as if they're the same because we're so focused on getting people's perspectives on something. We need to start with facts, and that's what China is about. And the West, I think we lost track of that a bit. We get so focused on perspectives and opinions and forget about facts. And so the combination, I think, is deadly if you can combine those two. So no problem. And they work really hard here, very dedicated. That's the culture. And so I was just reflecting on this when Chinese students, or international students, one of the complaints is getting a job in China, that it's not allowed when you're a student. You need to understand the bigger cultural background. And this is what I'm here for, to give you the big picture that will never gets talked about because no one's gone this deep, it seems, reflecting on China. And so, relative to the outside world. And I would say that is part of Chinese culture. That's not being hard on international students. They don't even want their own Chinese students having a job. The whole idea is this is your stage of life where you're a student and you dedicate your time to being a student. You commit to it. You don't have all these other things going on. All you do is study. And so Chinese families are set up as like basically a 100% support network. So you as a student can just focus on your studies and do the best you can. And so I don't think it's unfair or alien or anything for them to not allow international students to, work outside of school. It's to make you a better student. And China is very cheap anyway. The tuition is very low compared to the West. So, this is another reason why I see it's a really positive thing for you to come to a university in China versus, say, my home country, Canada, which would be far more expensive. And the cost of living and then all the scholarships. China knows it needs to educate the world about itself. It is part of the government to, get everyone to, like, the dream is to get everyone to come to a Chinese university. You learn Chinese and you learn about the culture. It's only going to help China, and it's only going to help your country too, working with China. So this is definitely part of it, and I support that. From what I see, I just see so much good coming from it. I'm sure there's some drawbacks and whatnot, but I see so much good from it. It's like a no brainer. And so come here, be prepared to learn, dedicate yourself to learning Chinese, dedicate yourself to learning your subject area, and you'll become excellent. You'll become a better person. You'll know your stuff, and then you could go to the West after. I help place Chinese students in Western universities, so I have experience with that too. So you could do both if you really want to be a superstar. And so the last topic is navigating daily life. I guess I've already talked a lot about that, but I really need to. It's mentioned in other videos about the kindness of Chinese and how helpful they can be. So that's not new, but I think it's not emphasized enough, this kind of kindness in navigating daily life. And so I have a really good story that just shows you how safe China is. So, safety, you do again, safety, you hear about in other videos. I don't think any. I've never heard anyone saying China's dangerous other than propaganda. And, but people who've really lived in China, safety is one of the number one things they talk about. And I want to just supercharge that. It is next level safety. It's not just safe, it is like, it's unimaginably safe. First little story, when I came to Nanjing, one of the first people I met was from Austria, and he'd been working for some time, I think for Siemens in Nanjing. And he told me, he said, you know what? You know, China is so safe. He says, I believe like a beautiful girl could walk alone through the middle of Nanjing at midnight from one end to the other and never be bothered. And so that blew me away when he told me that. I go, are you serious? And, I just freshly come from Canada. It was difficult to believe. But now, after 9 years in China in three different cities and having a zillion different experiences, I can't challenge that. I think that's absolutely true. And so I've reflected again on this issue of safety. It's next level. Like, I can't even. Often I'm trying to tell my Western friends what China is like, and I realize there's a limit to that. Because I realize that, to really get China, you need to live here. I can't tell you. If I use words, you're not going to believe it. You have to feel it. You have to experience it. And so this is part of China too. To get it, you can read all you want. There's so much bias out there, Western perspective applied to China repeatedly, and they completely get China wrong. I really think there's never been a country so misunderstood as China in the history of the world. Like, it is profoundly misunderstood. Even the top university professors who write books and whatnot, so many of them just don't get it. And you have to live here and reflect on it. And I have done that. So that's what I'm here for, to be your guide. You ask questions, details, I can help you, I can coach you and whatnot. So, navigating daily life, here's a good story. I told you initially Nanjing was a tier 2 city. It is now a new tier 1 city. So that's like the top, the most developed, the most kind of international facing, world facing cities in China. So I've lived there. And then I moved to Jinan, which was a tier 2 city. And I did notice that just the way on the streets, there's all sorts of little things that it just felt different compared to Nanjing. And now I'm in a tier 3 city, even. So I'm going lower and lower because I'm really fascinated by Chinese culture. These are the kind of places I wanted to live. So you might think I'm imagining, an outsider might think is that's getting deeper and into a part of China that is rarely talked about. Like, China is really not understood that well by the outside world, but tier 1 China, that's understood much better than tier 2 China or tier 3. And the higher we go, the more alien it's going to feel. So I'm imagining you're thinking I'm going into a darker and darker kind of place in terms of knowledge about these places. So these are places that people are unsure of. Like, say you're interested in a university in Yantai, that's perfect for you, but the idea that it's third tier and that you never hear about Yantai might intimidate you and keep you away. So I want to tell you a story that completely challenges that way of thinking. So here we are in a tier 3 city. I want to go down to a major shopping mall in downtown Yantai. And so I'm living on campus at the university, which all professors are, and so normal in China. And so I just have to walk, say, 10 minutes to one of the gates, many gates of the university. And so I have to go through that gate and cross the road to the other side to find the closest bus to take into Yantai. And just as an aside, bus fare is, I believe, 1 RMB. So that's 20 cents Canadian. Super cheap. And so travel is super cheap in China. I haven't mentioned that. Super cheap. So you can go see China. Anyway, so I'm waiting at the bus stop. I'm with about 5 students. I don't know any of them. They don't know me, but I'm the foreign older man standing with them, and I'm across from the university. So everyone would know that I'm probably a teacher. I'm probably a teacher of English. And so that's as much as we know each other. And then one of the students says, "Hey, there's a note here that says there's no buses running today." And so, there was a little bit of English, so that's how I understood. And I'm thinking, "Oh, really? So I have to get a taxi or something." And so for me, that's a little more involved. I don't usually take taxis. Usually I ride my bike. That's really what I've done, because exercise and have more control of where I'm going and whatnot. And so anyway, the girl beside me, gets on her phone right away, and I realize, oh, she's just getting a taxi or something. And then she orders the taxi, and then she just turns to me and she goes, "Well, where are you going?" I go, "Well, I'm going to this, the major shopping mall in Yantai, Wanda Plaza." And so she says, "Oh, well, I'm actually going very close to that area, meeting my friends for lunch. And would you like to join me in the Didi ride that I booked? It'll be here in a minute." And I just shocked. I just went, what? Like this girl was young and beautiful, maybe 20, 21, very attractive, and she's turning to me, older man who's, maybe two and a half times her age, and she doesn't know me. I guess she knows I must be a teacher at the university, but that's all she would know. And she's offering to have me share this taxi ride with her. And I'm just going, this would never, ever happen anywhere in Canada. And I don't even think anywhere in the West. It would be seen as stupid, naive for a girl to do this, right? But here she was. She did it. And I got in the taxi. We went downtown. It wasn't that far. It's what, 10-minute, 15-minute drive. She gets a taxi to pull over, and she says, just cross the road here, go over there, and there's the entrance to Wanda Plaza. And I'm going to go on over here and meet my friends for lunch. And that was it. And I went to try and pay her, to share the taxi fare, and she wouldn't accept. She wouldn't let me pay for my part of the taxi fare. And of course, taxis are super cheap too. Let's again, I'll give you a sense. It would be, I don't know what, 5, 10 RMB, which would be 1 or 2 Canadian dollars, and we've gone for a 20-minute taxi ride. And that's normal throughout China. Super cheap. And so that's what I do. I get out of the taxi and I walk over to Wanda Plaza, and that was it. And then she went on and met her friends, I guess. And but for her to reflect on this one little incident, it speaks volumes about how safe she feels, in China. She, as a young, beautiful girl, is not afraid to invite a much older man, even from a different culture, to join her in a taxi ride. This just profoundly shook me. I just thought, wow, here I am in a different country. I can't read the language. I can, just barely get by with the speaking the language, and so many parts of its culture are so alien. It's so ancient, in opposition to my the young country I come from. In other words, China is different in so many ways, and yet I'm treated like I'm at home, or more than at home. I'm treated better here than I would be in my own home country. So it's really something to experience that. You go, it's so alien on the surface, but there's this kindness and helpfulness underneath. That's been my experience of China. And so, yes, it's overwhelmingly positive. So I would say this is a superpower country for a single girl from a foreign country to come to attend university. So this is for parents out there. If you're a little bit worried, I would say hands down, there's no question compared to the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. I've been to Australia. I've been to New Zealand. I live in Canada. I've been to the US many times. I've been to the UK. I know these places is vastly more safe here, and so those are the top places in the world to go to university for international students. There's no question. It is safe here big time. And that's why all the cameras are around. It's really for safety. It's not for spying. I mean, that's how it's interpreted, but it's for safety. And yeah, absolutely sure about that. This is 9 years of being in China and cycling wherever I want to go. And so I think that's a superpower that is not promoted enough about China, just how safe it is. In China, safety basically is like a human right that we don't have in the West. We don't think about safety, especially for young, attractive girl. Like I can't imagine the challenges for that in a Western culture, but to come here and just feel that safe. I mean, she's Chinese, but I think a foreign girl would be same. She'd be looked at, if she had blonde hair or something, but it's just out of curiosity. And I can't imagine she'd really be approached by, a Chinese guy or something. The vast majority are very shy. So, but of course, it depends where you live. I'm in the most traditional part. Anyway, so that ends this podcast, and we'll see you next week for the next installment on what it's like to attend university in China.